Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? Alright, it's not often that I get excited about a film announcement, especially when it's an adaptation of a book, just because so many of them lately have been more miss than hit. That's adaptations, specifically films generally. But this news broke yesterday that Taylor Sheridan landed the rights to adapt S.C. Gwynn's Empire of the Summer Moon for film. And I'm excited about that for a couple of reasons. Sheridan, even though he makes a bunch of shows that I don't watch, they are successful and popular, well regarded and all that. It tells me that he's got chops, he's got connections with good talent. He does all those Yellowstone shows and spin-offs, and he's got Sam Elliott and Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren and Kevin Costner. Like, he's got established and effective talent in his films or in his TV shows and whatever. So he can get a good cast together for this. And I've read two books by S.C. Gwynn that were both amazing. Back in 2020, I kind of fell backwards into reading a bunch of Civil War history. I read Ron Chernow's giant biography of Ulysses S. Grant, and then I found S.C. Gwynn's biography of Stonewall Jackson, which was just amazing. It ended up being one of my favorite reads that year. And so I kept my ear to the ground and I saw what else he had written, and he's got this book called Empire of the Summer Moon. Well, what's it about? Well, in a sense, it focuses on the waning days of the Comanche and their influence in the central United States in the mid to late 1800s. Why they were such a force to be reckoned with, how they were altered after their initial encounters with the Spanish in the 1500s, and how they even, for a brief period, managed to push back and limit the westward expansion of the United States across the plains into the Pacific Ocean, and how the Colt 6-shooter was a weapon specifically developed to fight the Comanche on their territory, and using their tactics, countering them and being an effective force against them. But more than just the story of that particular Native American nation and their downfall, it's about a man named Quanah Parker. I'm curious to see who they'll get to play him in the film. Hollywood doesn't really draw from a broad talent pool when it comes to Native American actors. They like to recycle them. Chances are, I was just joking about this the other day, chances are they'll shoehorn Graham Greene into there somehow. I wouldn't be surprised if Tatanka Means ends up getting the main nod to play Quanah Parker. He was the son of a woman that Wikipedia will very politely say that she was assimilated into Comanche culture. It was more like she was captured as a prize of conquest and brutally beaten, and YouTube is sensitive about certain word usages, so I will just say it rhymes with Snape. Yeah, that happened to her a lot. And apparently that's common practice amongst the Comanches, and they didn't start to respect her until she started putting up a fight. And I'm getting ahead of myself here. The story starts in the late 1830s, and the main focus is on a woman named, she's a girl, she's 8 years old, Cynthia Ann Parker. Her family were homesteaders out on the plains. I can't remember if it was in Texas or Oklahoma. Those boundaries didn't really exist as we know them back then. But the Comanches were known for being able to swiftly set upon any kind of settlement, kill people, burn down what they didn't want to take the rest, and leave just destruction and death in their wake. But they would also take spoils, and that usually included young white hostages, and Cynthia Parker was just one of these hostages. Her whole family were killed, and she was taken, and that was that. Well, she was, so far as we know, just kind of enslaved or as a prize. I don't know at what point one of the Comanche leaders wanted to kind of take her to wife, we'll say. But she did eventually have two Comanche sons as a member of this band of Comanches. She was so integrated with the tribe over time that she forgot how to speak English, and she only knew how to speak Comanche and Spanish. And whenever this band would find themselves in the company of whites, they had ways of disguising her. They would mix animal fat with soot from fire pits and work it into her scalp and blacken her hair because she was blonde, and just kind of keep people from seeing her eyes. And if I remember right, like, she was with them for nigh on 20 years before eventually more encroachment and expansion happened, and eventually a well-armed enough band of United States military encountered this particular band that she was a prisoner of and liberated her. But by then she had, in the most literal sense, gone native. She had far more in common, culturally and in familial sense with the Comanche than she did with any of the white Americans. Her family were all dead, and she was now a mother of 2 Comanche sons, young sons at this point. But the United States Army viewed this as a liberation of her, that they were saving her and bringing her back to society. Problem was, very few people could communicate with her. There weren't a whole lot of Spanish speakers in the military. There were very few that could understand her and know her plight, and she kept trying to escape from whatever homes they put her in. She was trying to get back to her boys. Eventually she fell ill and died. I believe it was a flu, and it wasn't until much later that people were able to put 2 and 2 together and figure out who her sons were, and that's where Quanah Parker comes into the equation. His father was full-blooded Comanche chief. His mother was Cynthia Ann Parker, and he was kind of he grew into this role, but he became kind of a bridge between the 2 worlds, an ambassador, we'll say. But before he became any kind of diplomat or held any kind of role like that, he was a formidable warrior for the military to contend with. One of the things that I found really interesting about Gwyn's account was that with the lack of genetic diversity amongst the Comanches, they were all kind of physically stunted. Like, the average height of the Comanches at the time was about 5 foot, and the average height amongst whites was 5'7". For long and complicated reasons, the European whites had greater genetic diversity, which was like one of the main indicators or main influencers of intergenerational height. And without that genetic diversity amongst the Comanches, they just kind of stayed physically the same. But you add basically a new cocktail of genes to the pool there, and all of a sudden you start getting bigger people. And Quanah Parker, in the land of 5 foot tall Comanches, measured about 6'1" and was massively muscular and powerfully built, and very quickly became a force to be reckoned with. I'm curious to see just how much of the story will focus on Cynthia and on Quanah, if they'll do a little bit of his mother's story in flashbacks, and it'll just be here's this guy who knew Spanish and knew Comanche and knew English. I don't know what the name of their language is. Oftentimes the name of the language will be different from the name of the nation. I don't remember him saying whether there was a different one for that particular tribe. But he eventually became peacemaker is kind of a very docile way of putting it. After the Comanche were defeated by the American military, he was given the role of leading them to Fort Sill here in Oklahoma, where they were put on a reservation, and that was where their story ended. He then went on to have success in film roles in the early 1900s until he died, and he was one of the few who was able to kind of bring attention to the plight of the Native Americans and show hey, we've been here for a very long time. And then over the span of a couple hundred years, the world gets smaller. Europe finds out about this whole continent over here, and suddenly more and more and more and more people come, and you've got a different way of living. You farm on the land, you stay on the land, and where do we go? And he demonstrated this famously by approaching a bench with a white man sitting on it and saying, hey, move over. And the guy moved over, and Quanah sat down, and then he scooted closer to the guy and he said, move over. And the guy kind of obliged him, and he repeated this until there was no more room for the white dude on the bench, and he had to get up and stand up. And Quanah said, you see what I mean? This is what our story's been. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in how Hollywood generally will handle a story like that, but the facts are the facts. As I always say with history, they're not there for us to love them or hate them necessarily, and they're definitely not there for us to change them. They're there for us to learn from. And I thought it was a very powerful story about a figure that I'd never heard of before. He was one representative of one tribe, and how many unique Native American tribes were there, border to border, coast to coast. But nevertheless, there was enough of a record, enough evidence of his story and of his mother's story to put together a very complete and compelling narrative that S.C. Gwynne was able to write down in Empire of the Summer Moon. And now it's optioned by a guy who's got some chops and has done modern day westerns, we'll say. And we'll see how this true story on film stacks up to the story in print. If you haven't read this book before, definitely go check it out. S.C. Gwynne's got a couple of other books that I really want to read, including one that just came out last year about a British airship that exploded years before the Hindenburg and was a much bigger disaster, but most people haven't heard of it. I think we were willing to put the Hindenburg up as a lexicon, or as an icon in our national consciousness of, hey, maybe this is why we shouldn't build airships. Probably because it was German at a time when it wasn't popular in America to be all that German, but I digress. He's a fantastic writer. He has a way of bringing history to life while still just laying out the facts for you. And I'm curious to check that one out, but I'm very interested in seeing what the development process of this movie will look like over the next couple of years. If you've read it, let me know what you think. And till next time, drive safe. See you out there.